The betrayal began not with a shout, but with the soft, decisive click of a lock. I stood on my own porch, the Arizona sun warming the back of my neck, a sensation I had craved for 21 days in the sterile chill of the hospital. The taxi was pulling away, its tires crunching on the gravel of the driveway my husband, Anthony, and I had poured ourselves 30 years ago. Before me stood my son, Richard. But the man in the doorway was a stranger wearing my son's face, his expression carved from ice. "Everything changed while you were in the hospital," he said, his voice flat, rehearsed. "This house is no longer yours. You have no place here." The words didn't land as language, but as physical blows. Each one a punch to my still healing body. I gripped my cane, the wood smooth and familiar under my palm, a lone anchor in a world suddenly tilting off its axis. Behind him, I saw the blurred figures of his wife, Veronica, and her parents, Raymond and Claudia Sterling, moving through my living room as if they owned the place. The ensuing confrontation was a nightmarish pantomime. Their explanations: Veronica's parents needed to move from Dallas, the house is too much for you, the documents are signed, were a web of lies so flimsy and yet so impenetrable. The final, killing blow was Richard's quiet admission, power of attorney. "Remember those papers you signed before your surgery?" I did remember. A haze of preoperative anxiety and painkillers. Richard's soothing voice. "Just here, Mom. Don't worry about the legalese." I had signed my life away, guided by the hand of my only child. As I turned and limped toward the waiting taxi I'd wisely asked to linger, a seismic shift occurred within me. The pain and shock didn't recede, they were flash-frozen into a core of absolute, glacial clarity. The Isabella who was a mother, who wept, who pleaded, was gone. In her place stood the Isabella who had spent 40 years in bank compliance, a veteran of internal wars against fraud and deception. In the back of the taxi, watching my home recede in the rearview mirror, I didn't cry. I opened my banking app. The first transfer jumped out at me, $50,000 to Sterling Holdings, LLC. Dated the day after my surgery. Then another. And another. Over $220,000, siphoned while I fought a post-operative infection in the ICU. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "Mom, we need the passwords to your investment accounts to transfer the remaining funds for your care. Send them as soon as possible." The audacity was breathtaking. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent a single, pre-drafted message to my oldest friend, Gloria Evans. Plan B. The King's Gambit is in play. Hotel Monarch Gloria arrived at the anonymous downtown hotel room within the hour, a silver-haired avenger in a tailored suit. Her hug was fierce. "Those miserable vultures," she whispered, her voice thick with rage. Then she got to work, her briefcase spilling files across the desk. "We'll invalidate the house transfer. Anthony's trust is ironclad," she stated. "But that's the least of it, Isabella. Look at this." She showed me the withdrawal records, confirming what I'd already seen. And I did a quick background check. The Sterlings have a history in Dallas. Predatory loans, elder fraud, complaints that were mysteriously dropped. The pieces were forming a horrifying picture. This wasn't a spontaneous decision, it was a business plan. And my hospitalization had been their opening bell. Days later, fortified by Gloria's legal prowess and my own forensic digging, we uncovered the true scale of their ambition. It wasn't just my house. They were buying up the entire neighborhood, the Millers, the Hendersons, the Garcias, using a web of shell companies funded with my stolen money. They had filed a zoning application to turn our quiet, tree-lined block into a commercial gold mine, potentially netting them tens of millions. The cold calculation of it stole my breath. They were targeting my friends, my community, people who had loved Anthony, who had supported me after his death. "We have to stop them," I told Gloria, my voice steady. "Not just for me. For everyone." "We take it to the FBI," she replied. "But we need more than financial records. We need proof of intent from inside that house." Which is how I found myself a week later, applying lipstick in a hotel bathroom mirror, my heart a drum against my ribs. I was going back in. The plan was audacious. I would use the forgotten side door, the one Richard used as a teenager to sneak in after curfew, to enter while the house was empty except for Raymond, who held his business meetings in my study in the afternoons. My cane was now a piece of surveillance equipment, fitted with a camera and microphone. I was to get a recording of them explicitly discussing their scheme. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The familiar scent of my home, lavender and old books, was now polluted with Veronica's perfume and Raymond's cigar smoke. I moved silently, following the sound of voices to my study. Through the half-open door, I heard Raymond's arrogant tone. "The Miller closing is Friday. Then we push the zoning change through. The old lady's credit got us the last piece of financing." Clean as a whistle. I took a breath, activated the recorder, and pushed the door open. The confrontation was brief, electric. Raymond's shock turned to menace when he realized I was recording. He lunged for me, his hand closing around my arm with bruising force. Pain shot through my hip. I struggled, my thumb finding the panic button on my cane. The FBI's entry was a blur of shouted commands and drawn weapons. As Agent Rips checked on me and Raymond was read his rights, I felt a hollow victory. The first domino had fallen. That evening, I watched from an unmarked car as FBI agents swarmed my house. I saw the confusion on Richard's face as he arrived home early, the dawning horror as he saw me with the agents, the shattered mask of Veronica's composure as she was led away in handcuffs. "Mom, what have you done?" Richard asked, his voice broken. The question was a masterpiece of inversion. I looked at him, my son, my betrayer, and felt nothing but a vast, frozen wasteland. I protected myself from people who think they can take whatever they want. You chose them, Richard. Now live with it. But the true depth of their depravity was yet to be revealed. Days later, Agents Rips and Callahan showed us evidence recovered from Raymond's Dallas office, photographs of me, unconscious in my hospital bed. My stolen medical records. Notes on a dosage adjustment to my pain medication, in a handwriting that wasn't my doctor's. "They wanted to prolong your recovery," Rips said carefully. "Keep you incapacitated and out of the way." Then came the final, gutting piece of paper, a life insurance policy on my life, taken out 6 months prior. The beneficiary, Richard Thompson. When confronted with this in a stark interrogation room, Richard's reaction wasn't of a guilty man, but of a horrified one. He broke down, sobbing. "The policy. Veronica said it was for our future. I just signed. I didn't know. Oh God, what did I let them do?" In that moment, I saw the truth. My son was a fool, a weak, manipulated pawn. He had betrayed me for money and what he thought was love, but he had not conspired to kill me. The distinction was a chasm. His cooperation from that point was total. He gave the FBI everything: names, dates, the mechanics of the fraud in Dallas and Phoenix. His testimony, combined with our evidence, built an unassailable case. Faced with the prospect of life in prison, the Sterlings pled guilty. Raymond, Claudia, and Veronica were sentenced to decades behind bars for fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, and attempted homicide. The corrupt nurse who altered my medication received an 8-year sentence. My house was returned to me. My money was restored. But my life was a collection of fragments. The first night back in my house was the loneliest of my life. The FBI's forensic team had left it clinically clean, but the psychic stain of the Sterlings remained. Every room echoed with the ghost of their occupation. They had moved furniture, replaced curtains, discarded my recipe cards in favor of glossy and used cookbooks. In my study, Anthony's desk was turned away from the window he loved, facing the door like a fortress. It was in the deep bottom drawer of that desk, one I hadn't opened in years, that I found it. Tucked beneath a stack of Anthony's old architectural drawings was a small, fireproof lockbox I didn't recognize. It was locked. The key was nowhere to be found. A cold dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't Anthony's. This was theirs. I called Gloria. "Can you get a locksmith here?" Discreetly. An hour later, the box was open. Inside were not stacks of cash or jewels, but something more revealing, a slim, black ledger and a handful of USB drives. The ledger was a masterpiece of coded entries. It listed properties, not by address, but by code names. Swan was my house. Dove was the Millers. Finch the Hendersons. Next to each were dates, financial figures, and status updates. Next to Swan it read, acquisition via POA. Medical extension successful. RH compliant. RH compliant. Richard. My son. But it was the notes on the other properties that made my blood run cold. Next to Dove, husband terminal. Wife distressed. Approach with hospice care refi offer. For Finch, reverse mortgage trap set. Foreclosure imminent. They had files on all my neighbors. They knew their vulnerabilities, their tragedies, and were systematically exploiting them. The USB drives contained digital copies of everything, forged deeds, fraudulent loan applications, the doctored power of attorney documents, and the chilling medical records and photos from my hospitalization. It was the complete operational blueprint of their conspiracy. "We have to give this to the FBI," Gloria said, her face pale. "Not yet," I replied, a new plan forming. "This is more than evidence. This is a map of their entire network. The corrupt appraisers, the complicit loan officers. We can take down the whole machine." With the FBI's agreement, we used the ledger to quietly identify and investigate every name, every company listed. The investigation widened, snaring accomplices in 2 states. The Sterling operation was being dismantled root and branch. During this time, Richard began writing to me from prison. His letters were not pleas for forgiveness, but stark, painful confessions. "Mom," the first one began. "I have no right to call you that. I'm writing because I need you to know who I became and how. It didn't start with the house. It started 3 years ago, with a bad investment. I lost our savings, our retirement fund. I was too ashamed to tell Veronica. Raymond offered a sure thing to win it back. I was desperate. I took it. The sure thing was a fraud. I was now complicit. They owned me. Veronica, she knew. She used it. She said if I didn't cooperate with their restructuring of your assets, her father would ensure I took the fall for everything. She called you the legacy asset. I was weak. I was a coward. I told myself we were just repositioning your wealth. That you'd be comfortable somewhere else. I lied to you because I was lying to myself. When I saw the FBI, when you looked at me with those cold eyes, the lie shattered. I saw what I'd done. What I'd allowed them to do to you. There is no punishment worse than the knowledge of my own betrayal. I read his letters with a mix of fury and a heartbreaking pang of recognition. This was the little boy who, when he broke my favorite vase, had tried to hide the pieces before finally, tearfully, confessing. He had always been conflict-averse, eager to please, to smooth things over. The Sterlings had weaponized that weakness. The neighborhood, once a target, became a coalition. I shared the broad strokes of what had happened, omitting Richard's deepest culpability to protect the ongoing investigation, and found an army of allies. Frank Miller, though frail from his cancer treatments, became the group's patriarch, using his decades of experience as a civil engineer to scrutinize every planning document the city produced. Maria Garcia's son, a journalist, began digging into the Sterlings' past, publishing exposes that helped pressure authorities. It was through this network that I met Eleanor Jameson, the new neighbor who had moved into the house across the street. She was a retired literature professor, sharp-witted and fiercely independent. She didn't offer pity, only fierce camaraderie. Men like Raymond Sterling are the Iagos of the world, she declared one afternoon over tea in my now-restored garden. They can't stand to see a well-ordered world. They have to poke at it, manipulate it, until it proves as corrupt as they believe it to be. Your son was their Roderigo, a fool, but not inherently evil. Her words offered a framework for understanding that was devoid of sentimentalism. It was a relief. As the months passed, the public legal battles concluded. The Sterling trio was sentenced. My finances were secure. The house was mine again, every piece of furniture returned to its rightful place, every trace of them scrubbed away. But the internal reconstruction was slower. I expanded the Anthony Miller Medical Research Foundation, creating the Center for Elder Justice. We provided legal clinics, financial literacy workshops, and advocacy for seniors targeted by fraud. My pain became my purpose. I testified before a state Senate committee on elder abuse laws, using my case to argue for stricter regulations on powers of attorney. The work was healing. It was my answer to their cruelty. Throughout it all, Richard's letters continued. They changed over time. The self-flagellation gave way to quieter reflections. He wrote about the books he was reading, the therapy he was undergoing, the GED classes he was teaching to other inmates. He was, piece by piece, trying to rebuild a man from the wreckage. Dad's copy of Man's Search for Meaning was in the prison library, he wrote in one letter. It felt like a sign. He always talked about finding purpose in suffering. I'm trying, Mom. I'm really trying. I never wrote back. But I kept every letter, tied with a ribbon in the bottom of my own desk drawer. A year and a half into his 3-year sentence, I received a request. Richard's lawyer, a earnest young public defender, contacted Gloria. Richard was being considered for a transitional program, a move to a minimum security facility with work release privileges. A character statement from me would be pivotal. Gloria looked at me across my kitchen table. You are under no obligation, Isabella. What they did to you, it's unforgivable. I know, I said softly, looking out at the oak tree where a younger Richard had built a fort. But unforgivable doesn't mean unchangeable. Does it? I agreed to see him one more time. The visitation room at the new facility was less oppressive. There were windows. Richard looked healthier, his eyes clearer. The prison pallor was gone, replaced by a tan from outdoor work details. Mom, he said, sitting down. Thank you for coming. I read your letters, I said. He nodded. I didn't expect you to. I just needed to send them. We talked for an hour. Not about the case, or the fraud, but about small things. He asked about the house, about the garden. I asked about his classes. It was stilted, awkward, like two strangers trying to find a common language. Finally, he said, the lawyer told you about the transitional program. Yes. I'm not asking you to write the statement, he said quickly. I I wanted to tell you face to face that if I get the chance, I won't waste it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be someone you and Dad wouldn't be ashamed of." I looked at my son. The ghost of the boy was there in his eyes, in the set of his shoulders. The man who had betrayed me was also there, a permanent scar on both our souls. "Anthony wrote you a letter," I said, my voice thick. I pulled the worn envelope from my purse and slid it across the table. "Before he died. He asked me to give it to you when the time was right." Richard's hands trembled as he opened it. He read it slowly, his lips moving slightly. When he finished, a single tear traced a path down his cheek. He folded the letter carefully. "Thank you," he whispered. He said a man is defined not by his failures, but by what he builds from the rubble." "That sounds like him," I said. As our time ended, he asked the question I knew was coming. Is there a path home?" "Not to the house," he added swiftly. "I mean, to you?" I stood up, leaning on my cane. The answer was not simple, and I would not cheapen it with a simple one. Home isn't a place you return to, Richard. It's something you build. You tore our old one down. If you want a new one, you'll have to build it yourself, one honest brick at a time. And I'll be watching. That's all I can promise." He accepted this with a slow nod. It wasn't absolution, but it was a possibility. A single, fragile seed of a future. Driving away from the facility, the desert landscape opening up around me, I felt the permanent, aching loss of what was. But for the first time, I also felt a faint, tentative sense of peace about what might be. The battle was over. The long, slow work of peace was beginning. I did write the character statement for the parole board. It was not an exoneration. It was a factual account of his cooperation, his remorse, and the steps he had taken toward rehabilitation. I wrote that while the harm he caused was profound, he appeared to be making a genuine effort to atone. It was the truth. He was accepted into the program. 6 months later, he was transferred to a minimum security facility and began a work release program, doing data entry for a small nonprofit. He never asked to come to the house. He would call me every Sunday afternoon. The conversations were still awkward, but they became a ritual. He told me about his job, his sessions with his parole-mandated therapist. I told him about the garden, about the Center for Elder Justice. We were building a new, fragile, and vastly different relationship on the scorched earth of the old one. A year after his release, he asked if he could take me to lunch. It was a neutral ground, a small cafe near my house. He paid with money he had earned himself. He showed me a photograph of the small, sparse apartment he was renting. It was humble, a world away from the life he had with Veronica, but it was his. "I'm seeing someone," he said cautiously, watching my reaction. "Her name is Lena. She's a teacher. She knows everything. She knows I'm trying to be better." "I'm glad for you, Richard," I said, and I found that I mostly meant it. The past was not forgotten. The betrayal was not forgiven. But it was no longer the only thing that defined us. We were learning to hold the immense love and the immense hurt in our hands at the same time, without one canceling out the other. One Sunday, he came over to the house. It was his first time back since the day I was evicted. He stood silently in the doorway for a long time, his eyes taking in the restored living room, the family photos back on the walls. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "For all of it." "I know," I said. He didn't come in. He helped me repot a heavy rose bush in the garden, his hands, so like his father's, working the soil. It was a small thing, a simple, physical act. But as we worked side by side under the warm Phoenix sun, something tight and frozen in my chest began, at last, to thaw. The story of Isabella Hayes did not have a fairy tale ending. There was no magical moment where the damage was undone. But it had an ending of a different kind, one of hard-won peace, of a justice that was both legal and personal, and of a love that had been to hell and back, battered and scarred, but had, against all odds, found a way to begin again. The wicked had been punished. The betrayed had found strength. The lost had been found, not as they were, but as they could be. And in the quiet of my reclaimed home, with the scent of my roses drifting through the window, I finally laid down the weight of my armor, and simply was.